So welcome everyone. This is TILES2020, the Tsugaru Ideas for Language Education. Woohoo! Normally we would be in the Tsugaru area here in northwestern Japan, but thanks to the wonder of Zoom and the danger of the coronavirus, we are all online joining from around the world.
Okay, no
Yeah,
worries.
I think it's great that we have people from other countries able to join us, and we're really looking forward to 4 great presentations. Our first will be the keynote. Everyone can see the screen, Designing EFL Materials That Work. We have Barbara Hoskins Sakamoto, who will be doing a 1-hour keynote presentation for us, and after that we'll take a break. We are monitoring the chat room, so if you have questions throughout, you can post your questions in the chat room. We are recording this, so if you don't want your image to show up on the recording, you can turn your camera off. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Barb and ask her to take it away.
Okie dokie. Well, that was one of the more exciting beginnings that I've had for an online session. And what we're going to do today is actually, it's a little bit more like a workshop than a keynote, simply because I'm not really good at just talking for an hour. So I'm going to be expecting people to sort of work through it with me. But what I wanted to do is talk a bit about EFL materials, as opposed to ESL, as opposed to language arts. And my background in this, and a lot of one of the ways that many of you know me is from Let's Go. And so basically, I have been working on rewriting the same book for about 30 years now. And over those years, you know, I've seen a lot of trends come and go in young learner publishing. Let's Go is one of the first books written specifically for the EFL market. And now we have a wealth of choice, which is wonderful. But there have been some things that I've noticed that stay perennial, that they always work. And so I wanted to share some of the things that I've discovered over time working on these materials. And you know, this is me back when I started, when I was, you know, like 16 or something, much younger than I am now. And one of the things you'll notice is that almost every textbook you look at includes grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and functions. And most of them include the skills for reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Now, if you're writing materials for your class, your worksheet might just focus on grammar, or your worksheet might just focus on reading, or you know, your lesson might be about listening. But if you're working on a course book, for example, chances are you're going to include those 4 parts of language and those 4 skills. But how you arrange them is where the creativity comes in. So if you want to see how people are arranging the materials, you can look at the syllabus usually in the back of the book, because you can take those 4 areas and those 4 skills and do a lot of different things with them. And that's where you have the creativity of authors creating new course books. So here, for example, you know, Let's Go is pretty unabashedly a grammar syllabus. And there's some reasons that works well that we'll talk about, and there's some reasons that people don't like it, which we'll also talk about. But even within a very overtly grammar-based syllabus, you know, you still have topics, right? And you still have functions. So, you know, we have themes for every unit, and within those units, the language is used to do something. So for example, we're going to talk about food in one unit, and then within that unit, we're going to talk about learning how to say things that I want, or asking for things. So nothing is pure. There isn't a truly, unless you're looking at a grammar workbook, or you're looking at a listening course book, or a pronunciation course book, you're going to pretty much find all of those elements in a course book, which if you're wondering why a lot of course books look kind of similar, that'd be the reason. So you have the choice of organizing things in different ways. And now, if you prefer to unmute yourself and speak, if you prefer to type in chat, either one is okay. We're a very small group, so I have no problem with people leaving themselves unmuted and participating in discussion here. But for example, if you're writing for specific audiences, can you imagine when you might want to organize the language to focus on process, like the process of doing something, or when you want to focus on functions, the tasks and or the like asking for things, making invitations, asking the price about something, making a reservation, or when you want to focus on tasks like building a resume or building a marketing plan or something like that. So can you imagine each of those cases? What about process? Can you think of any books that sort of focus on the process of language as opposed to product? If you're teaching in university, chances are you've used a course book that focuses on process. Okay, so for example, it's not when would you want to focus on process? Okay, you use it, but to do what? Okay, yeah. When you're academic writing, if you're teaching writing, you're using process most of the time. Sometimes business as well. What about functions? Functions is one of the oldest ways of organizing a course book. Doing ordering, processing orders, yeah. Okay, so a functional syllabus, notional functional, is actually, it became more, communicative. It was the label that got slammed on it later, but a functional notional syllabus, or notional functional, got it reversed, is from the beginning of teaching language almost. And what kinds of books or what kinds of classes would you want to use a functional syllabus-based course book for? Any ideas? Okay, ESP, right. You business English too. One of the original functional course books is actually like Berlitz, the phrase books. When you get a phrase book for traveling, it's almost always organized by function. Okay, and then also now, tourism, hospitality. What about tasks? This is kind of a more recently popular thing. And process and tasks can be very similar. Yeah, task-based learning. We're actually, Japan is lucky to be the home of one of the only really good task-based learning course book that I'm aware of, widgets. So for business. Oh, okay, yeah. Inspire includes a lot of tasks, right? So I told you that there are very few pure syllabi. Most of them are eclectic, right? Even a book as overtly grammatical as Let's Go is eclectic, just not as much as a process-based book, for example. Okay, now the other thing that I'm going to be sharing in this hour-ish talk is things that I've learned in hindsight. So I'm going to be looking at some of the problems in other course books, but I also want to show you some of the mistakes we made, simply so you don't think I'm picking on people. But most of the things that are really obvious to you are obvious when you're looking back. They're obvious in hindsight. That they look fine when you're doing them, and then after the book's been out for a while and you start getting feedback from people, then it's like, oh, how did we miss that? So hindsight is a wonderful thing. It's always crystal clear. We're going to look at 4 areas when you're putting together materials. And now this is true whether you're working on individual worksheets for your class or whether you're working on a course book. You're going to have the next big 7-book series for the world. So you're going to look at the students who are using the book, the teachers who are using the materials, the contents of the materials, and the parameters restricting what you can put in the books or in your materials. We'll look at them individually. So first, looking at the students. If you're working just for your class, and I know teachers who write, create a lot of materials for their class, they create entire books for their class, but you don't have to worry so much about whether or not things are clear, because you're right there and you can clarify things for people if they don't understand, right? So you don't have to worry about somebody picking up the book and trying to figure out what the heck you were trying to do. Now, if you're writing for students at your school, maybe all the teachers create materials together and pool their resources. And again, you're easy to ask, right? If somebody's not understanding what you're trying to do, they can come to they can get you at lunch or something and say, now, what did you mean here? What am I supposed to do? If you start writing things for students in your country, you have to worry a little bit more about whether things are transparent, whether the structure is obvious, whether somebody can pick up your book and they know what to do. But you know what's okay. You know the limitations in your country. Like if you're creating materials for Indonesia, for example, you would know not to include pigs. If you were writing materials for Japan, for example, you know which holidays Japanese children tend to celebrate at school. If you're writing materials for students in your region, like Asia, there's pluses and minuses, right? Let's Go started out as a regional course book for Asia. And you would not believe the number of hours we spent arguing over how to show a picture of a bowl of rice, for example, because both rice bowls and chopsticks are different in Taiwan, Korea, Japan. And you don't want the rice bowl to be clearly one country or another. Now, students using the books in Mexico don't care. A rice bowl is a rice bowl. But, there were decisions that were important to us because of the region. And then if you're writing a global course book, you have no idea who's going to use your materials. And so you need to be very clear. You need to not irritate people. You need to not get picked up by the country censors and blocked from being sold in the country. So, but you need to make sure that people can pick up your materials and know what they're supposed to do. So here are two examples of how some authors have decided to try to engage young learners. So the alien angle is a very common one. Early children's course books had aliens, they had talking animals, they had talking dinosaurs, they had talking fantasy, fantasy situations. But, when you look at this, what do you need? I need a swimsuit. Well, I assume that means that alien has no clothing under the water, which I'm surprised nobody questioned that. And the conversation between the boy and the animals, oh, this pie is delicious. I like the salad. Is there any more of this pasta? And the idea that you have to find a context that somehow bringing in an outsider or a non-person character in order to create a reason to have a conversation. We always think that's intrinsically interesting to children. And yet one of the restrictions that we had early on was that we weren't allowed to have aliens or talking animals. We were told that we needed to have realistic contexts, which at first was really disappointing because, who doesn't love cute little aliens or talking animals? But in hindsight, this is one of the things that worked out really well because it meant we needed to find a realistic context for each of the conversations or each of the language points or each of the questions and answers. And if there wasn't a real reason to ask the question, then maybe it didn't need to be taught, right? So it became a blessing for us in disguise. But that's why you don't see, you know, we have mascots that are like signposts, the cats, Sam and Ginger, but they don't speak anymore. So here, if you look at this page, this has a few things going on here that I think are can help us identify the things that are important in creating materials that are effective. Okay, so if you looked at this page, what are students supposed to do? If you opened up the book and saw this page, do you know what to do? What kind of lesson is this? Anyone? What is people? Yep, pronunciation, phonics. Okay, so yeah, they're going to learn phonics sounds in isolation, in the context of words, in a chant, and then they're going to practice reading and answering comprehension questions. All right, it's a pretty straightforward lesson. And it's pretty obvious what students are supposed to do. But one of the things, three of the points that are important here is, number one, it's engaging. Okay, the art is engaging because it's cute. It looks like fun. We have the reading is in one of those Where's Wally kind of illustrations where there's a lot to do there. So the structure is also scaffolding the skills. We've got the phonics, we've got a chant to use them in, and we've got them again in the reading. And the reading doesn't include any new words, except for the phonics words. So it creates a space to learn. And I think that this is a key point in materials, that they need to have a space for students to learn, which means that there's enough repetition on the page and enough support so that students can get the point that you're trying to get across. But there's also enough space for students to be able to do more with it. So if you have students who, if this page is really difficult, they've got the phonics support, the chant for rhythm and more practice reading, and then they've got the major reading at the end. So there's a scaffolding so they can do that. But if the students are really skilled and this page is too easy for them, there's enough material here that the students can do other things with it. Like, what else could you do with this page besides having them read the little paragraph there and answer the questions? Well, you could have students make up their own hints, like which, you know, where is the girl who is? Find somebody in the picture and describe them. So you can, there's a space to learn there for both the students who need a lot of support and students who can expand on what they are able to do. And as I promised, I wanted to show you some of our sort of boo-boos. And so there's a problem here. Can you identify the problem? These are my friends, Ben and Wendy. This is David. Nice to meet you. Hi, David. If you're in Japan, read the names the way your students would read the names. How would your students say those? And that became a big problem for us. So Ben and Debu. So nobody could get past, you know, poop and fat, which is what the students, that they sounded a little bit like the Japanese words for, you know, toilet functions and obesity. And so it took away from the learning on the page. So they didn't make it into the next edition. So sometimes the problems are not obvious when you're writing it, and it only becomes obvious after students start using it. So who are your students? Who are you writing for? Who are you teaching? Like in the case of Let's Go, we're writing for children between the ages of, now they get younger and younger. So now between students as young as 3 are using the books and students in high school are using the books. So that's quite an age range for us. And they're in over 160 countries. So we don't know everything about the students using our books. But what about you? When you create materials, who are you writing for? University students, high school students, primary students, in your classroom, in your school? Are you looking to publish in a regional market? Are you looking to publish in a global market? Can you type in chat, just who are you, who are your target students when you're writing materials? And again, I got no problem if you want to unmute anybody. Local, okay, so junior high school students, university students in Japan and abroad, university, kindy and elementary. We've got a real range here, right? And who you are writing for plays a big role in how you write for them. You wouldn't, one of my very first conferences after Let's Go came out probably in the early 90s. Someone came up to me at the conference and said, "Oh, I love your books, but you know, the voices on the cassette," this is a long time ago, "they're a little bit juvenile." I said, "Well, they're supposed to be 6. So what level are you using these books for?" She says, "Oh, well, I'm using them in my university class." I said, "Well, you know, actually they aren't really designed for university." And yet she loved them, the students loved them, but she just kind of wished we would re-record the cassettes with adult voices doing the conversations. So you never know where your stuff's going to end up. So one thing, a point to remember, is that it's not enough to be busy. The question is, what are we busy about? And again, one of the questions I get quite often is, you know, again, I love your material, but what do I do with the other 40 minutes in class? Right, because it only takes me 10 minutes to go through the stuff on the page, and then what do I do? So their favorite book had like 20 new vocabulary words and maybe 5 grammar patterns and some reading. And that took them the whole 50 minutes to get through. But the question, we could question how much students were actually getting out of spending the entire time going through the material on the book as opposed to using the language in the book. It's a more of a philosophical debate. But, you know, are you creating busy work, or are you creating the jumping off point for teachers to move from? Like, are they going to use your worksheets or your materials or your books and then apply them, you know, personalize them for their own classes? Or are you trying to create an entire 50 minutes worth of work or an hour's worth of work for students to do at their desks? You know, both are possible. So the next thing you want to look at is teachers. Yeah, meaningfully busy, I think, is a good way to look at it, Mari. It's that obviously you don't want students to be bored in class. You don't want them to be sitting around not doing something. But do they have to be busy doing it with the books open? And the answer, obviously, I don't think they do. But there are teachers who think that in language class that students should be working in the book the whole time. So the world is a big place and there's many different approaches. So when you're looking at teachers too, if you're writing things just for yourself, again, they don't have to be that clear because you know what you had in mind. If you're writing things for teachers at your school, then you know, you don't want to waste their time with them picking up a book and having no clue what you had in mind, because then they have to, or your worksheet, they have to chase you down and get clarification. But again, it's not that hard to do. Are you writing for experienced teachers? Are you writing for inexperienced teachers? And one thing I wanted to mention there is, like, for example, what we found with Let's Go is that the majority of teachers, we have very experienced teachers using our books, but the biggest demographic was either experienced teachers who don't normally teach English, or inexperienced teachers for whom English is a first or a fluent language. So though that demographic requires a level of clarity and explanation that perhaps when you're writing for yourself is not important. Is that clear? I didn't do a great job of explaining that. And Edo, you're right that a lot of people like the safety of the textbook. And so if you know that they're going to be using the textbook for the entire time, you want to build in those activities on the page in the textbook and make them clear so that they're not just doing exercise after exercise. So you need to build in that kind of support if you know that the people using the books are unlikely to close the books and try activities on their own. And again, if you have experienced teachers who don't really speak English, if you have teachers who are fluent in English but have never taught, then you need a lot of that support in the materials. If you're working with mostly very experienced teachers who don't appreciate being told what to do, then you want to create enough space in the materials for them to be flexible in the way they use it. So here, this is a page in a course book. And again, I'm not trying to make fun of any particular course book, and I'm not going to say where any of these are from. But if you open this up in the book, would you know what to do? What is it? I mean, obviously it's a game, but how do you play it? No, this isn't Snakes and Ladders. This is a board game. You make the rules yourself. Yeah, if you're an experienced teacher, you would know to make the rules yourself. You would know to have maybe cards for each of the numbers that you land on so that students have to answer. You could, yeah, if you know what you're doing, there's a lot here. If you know what you're doing, you're going to appreciate having this openness to give you the flexibility of creating your own game. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the heck you're supposed to do. And you might get frustrated. So there is no support on the page for it. I'm assuming that there is in a teacher's book, but I haven't seen the teacher's book. And most teachers don't have access to the teacher's book. Okay, so here's another one. What are you supposed to teach on this page? This is the first unit in book 1 of a course book series for young learners. What are you supposed to teach here? Introductions? Yes. What else? Classroom names? Yes. Locations? Yes. How to say floors? Yes. You've got a substitution conversation practice. So on the page, students are looking and listening, then they're reading and saying, then they're saying again, and they're doing a role play. This is one of those pages. It's pretty busy. There's a lot going on here, but it may not have enough support for the students to do this, particularly if it's book 1, because they're being expected to know how to do the conversation, how to, and you're supposed to get the idea that the yellow highlighted thing can be substituted. And we're learning classroom names. And it does look an awful lot like the idea was taken from a course book for young adults, or teens at least. And yes, the art does not help the text. And we're going to look at the role of art in a bit. Okay, so there's a few things that are an issue here. That it probably looked okay in the planning, but in the execution, if you open it up in class, it might be kind of hard to figure out what you're supposed to do or how to approach it. Like, what do you teach first? You might want to go down and actually teach those classroom names first, or the floor names first before you go back up and do the conversation. It's hard to say. So here's the flip page of this. This is the facing page. So this is all one lesson, mind you. Are students going to know what to do when they hit this page? Is it obvious? So we're going to look, listen, and repeat. Now there's no audio mark, so I'm not really sure what they're listening to, if there's a cassette or a CD, or if the teacher's supposed to read it. It's not really clear. And Sophie, to answer your question, yes, they are usually trialed, but sometimes textbooks are trialed in a echo chamber. So the teachers using the books already know what they're supposed to be doing. And so sometimes you don't, and again, I've published the same book, five editions of the same book in 30 years, and every edition has had something that teachers have pointed out being a problem. I think probably in my mind, most famously, when we did our 4th edition, the 3rd edition had a lot of mistakes. And so when we did the 4th edition, we were very afraid of having any mistakes in the book. So everybody went through it very, very carefully. The authors proofread everything. The designers proofread everything. Editors proofread everything. The copy editors proofread everything. And still, at our very first workshop, Oxford published 200,000 posters of the alphabet page. And somebody pointed out that the little L, big L, little L lion, was actually an I. So we had hundreds of thousands of course books and 200,000 posters with the wrong letter above the lion. And actually, it took like 4 workshops before somebody noticed. So it wasn't that obvious, but everybody had looked at that art. Everybody had looked at that page, and none of us saw the error. So it happens. Things do get through. We're lucky enough, we sell enough books that we can fix our mistakes and we get a new run. And here, though, let's look at some of their problems here. So what I see is that we're asking students to listen, speak, read, and answer all on one page. And again, this is designed for beginning young learners classes. So I would say from the very beginning, reading is probably an issue. Listening and matching. If they're listening to the teacher pronounce it, we've got all the new words and highlights again. So they're asking students to do probably more than is comfortable for the students at their skill level. And now the question and answers at the bottom too, they're very different patterns than what students have learned previously. So I think the authors are trying to bring in a lot of authentic language, and they're trying to provide a rich context for language. And those are really good things if you're working with teachers who know how to approach that. But if you have a teacher who just picks up the book and wants to know what to do, this is probably going to be too hard for most of the students. And if the language is too hard for the students, what happens to the language teaching? What language is it generally taught in? If the English is too hard, the teacher is going to spend most of that hour explaining what's on the page in the student's L1. So the students aren't getting very much practice with the target language, right? So again, that's why you want to have transparency. That's why you want to have the structure, scaffolding the skills so that students can build up what they need to do, what they need to know in order to do the tasks on the page. So in contrast, okay, here's another page from Let's Go, which one of our big selling points is that we are transparent. That teachers in Zambia pick our books up off the bookshelf because they can open the book and they know what they're supposed to do. It's not like Oxford has any offices there. So here, what are students supposed to do? Our teachers will look at this page and know that they should do what? We're teaching the vocabulary, then we're practicing the vocabulary. Very straightforward. Yeah, we're learning about the food and then we're talking about it. So we're going to learn the vocabulary. We're going to practice it in context. We're going to give students more practice talking about different food, or talking with the patterns in sentences, and then we're going to use it in a chant. So they're getting a lot of practice with that structure. And if that was the only thing you did on the page, that would be okay. But we want to build it so that it is a flexible page, so that teachers can do more with it. We want to give teachers a space to teach, right? So the language is dead simple. It doesn't take long to teach, and that gives the teachers time to do more with it. So what are some of the things that you could, if you use this as a jumping off point, what are some of the things that you could consider doing with this language beyond the coursebook page? What could you use your space to teach to do? How could you expand on this? Yes, you can make games. You could use picture cards of the food. You could discuss your favorite foods. Okay, how could you personalize this? How could you make, now, let's go as a global coursebook, which means not only do we not insult anybody, but we also don't include a lot of specific things, right? They can present their local foods, things that they like. Now, this is an international food page. So so you can talk about things that they like to eat at home or at a restaurant, things that they've eaten on their trips. They can ask and answer. They can make the questions meaningful by asking, have you ever eaten durian, for example? Or have you ever eaten, all my foreign foods are disappearing from my head right now, but curry, or things that what utensils they use. There's a lot of jumping off places for this. Okay, so that's what I consider a space to teach, that you're not locking teachers into one way of doing the lesson. So you're giving them the tools that they can use to make the class their own. Now, the teacher's book provides a sample lesson, and I used to think nobody used a teacher's book, and then I visited countries where the teacher's book was treated as holy writ and people followed all the steps, which made me a lot more careful about writing the teacher's books. But even in the teacher's book, we always provide ideas for how teachers can expand on the lesson, or make it take advantage of digital tools, or doing more research. Students can get online and look for, what is the most popular food in Bangladesh, for example, or what is the most popular food in the United States, or what is the most, and if you search online now, those answers are there. If you look at the most popular food in the world, you'll get a ranking of what's popular in different countries. So you can build that in, and experienced teachers will know how to do that. They will take this language and they will run with it. But there's enough structure here so that inexperienced teachers can still teach a solid lesson, even if they know any of the other things to do. Okay, so you want something that's flexible, but you want to also build in a space for teachers to teach, because they once they have enough experience, they don't enjoy being locked into things. So here, one of the places that teachers really, one of the weaknesses is writing instructions. So this is from a course book, a university course book. So listen to the instructions for this. Make a name card by writing your first name on a piece of paper. Choose a partner and introduce yourself. Have a short conversation as in the example below. Don't forget to give a good handshake and make friendly eye contact. Then exchange name cards so that, I can't read the word, my video is over. It become your partner and your partner becomes you, and then find a new partner. Then remember your first partner's information so that you can tell your new partner about him or her or him. And then we have the example. So what are some of the problems here? Well, some cultures don't shake hands. That's one thing, but just in the language on the page. So many steps in one paragraph, right? Okay, so the first thing that I notice is that the instruction line, name card exchange, that is wasted real estate. Now your page has probably A4 size, right? So every bit of your paper is valuable. You want to make the most use of that, and you need to make the most use of it so that you can still have white space. Right, it's too long and there's a lot of steps, and they're not taking advantage of the instruction line. Okay, so if we were doing a workshop, I would have you rewrite this in one way, try to make it more clear. But I just was playing with it, and this is what teachers have come up with in some of my workshops. Yeah, but it could be a really engaging activity. So I simplified, right? I'm using art to give the idea of exchanging name cards. And this is a university course book designed for students in Japan. So that's the whole name card thing. So make a name card and introduce yourself to a partner. Exchange cards. Okay, so the whole introduction about the, and practice introductions could be a good one too. Yep, so there's not one way to answer that question of how to make it better. And that's one reason that it's good to work with a partner, or it's good to work with co-authors, and it's good to have editors, because each, if this was first draft, and if the last one was first draft and this was second draft, then the third draft might change it to practice introductions, and then we might try it out with a teacher and see, is it clear to you? And the teacher will say, no, you need to have the exchange cards in there or something. So you want to get feedback on the material that you're creating. But again, the instruction line is valuable real estate. You don't want to waste it by having instruction by using it for something that's just a topic heading that means nothing, right? So the comparison between this one and that, name card exchange. Okay, name card exchange is the title of the activity. Students don't need to know the name of the activity. It's only important if it's a shortcut for teachers to know the instructions, but the instructions are all written underneath, so they really don't need to have the name of the activity on top. So we can change it and have the instructions at the very top, and we can bold them because they're in the instruction line. And then we provide an example, and we can support the meaning with art. Can you see the difference? And I'm sure you can improve it more. Okay, here's another one. Now this one, I want you to look at it, and I love the way they broke the questions and the answers, right? And so, but there was something that really puzzled me when I first looked at this. Okay, so how do you, again, we have the title of the activity. So here are some important questions you will need to know and use both inside and outside the classroom, and work with a partner to match to make questions. Okay, so what are some of the problems here? It's all over the place, right? Well, I think that's intentional. I think they're trying to make the matching the questions and the answers more engaging. And it might work that way. And the colors, yeah, that was the thing that got me, was what's the purpose of the colors? At first, I assumed that how do you write your name in kanji would be one color, right? Visual support for the activity to make it easier to match beginnings and endings. How do you pronounce this word? And so it's a design feature that isn't working, because the colors, you assume the colors have meaning, because everything in a course book has meaning. Everything in a worksheet has meaning. There has to be a purpose to it being there, because again, they are using almost a quarter of the page with these colored phrases, right? So they have to be doing something. Otherwise, it's a waste of space. And again, most of the time you will see those, people will write the sentences on a piece of paper because they'd rather have another activity on the page. But this one is a little bit more like a workbook. So again, when I was working with it, okay, I just, I didn't even make it attractive. I just put the questions and the answers in the same colors. And I moved all of the beginnings to the left and all the endings to the right, because it's really, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance when we have to look for the beginning of the question on the right-hand side and then look for the ending of the question on the left-hand side. Our brains, if you want to shake people up, then that's a good thing to do. But if you want to support what they're trying to do, now, if you wanted to make this more challenging, what would you do? How could you make this more challenging? One really simple way. One color. If everything was black, you'd really have, I mean, you could end up like, how do you turn on this word? Or how do you come in English? You can really get in some trouble there with the students in the university class. If you want to make it more challenging, get rid of the color. How about if you wanted to make it easier? What would you do if you wanted to make this easier for students? How can you make this easier? Matching to draw lines, yeah. Don't have everything in columns. Beginnings on one side, endings on the other. And students just match. So they only have to, they don't have to do the angles. Now this is very attractive though, although, 4-color printing is pretty expensive. So, but the fact that they had the color meant, because they were willing to pay for color for this, means that the color must have had meaning. And yeah, you could have fewer questions if you wanted to make it easier. Now for university level, this is probably not so hard, but they were trying to take something that you always do at the beginning of class, which is classroom language, useful English phrases, how to ask for information, like classroom management in English, teaching students how to use useful phrases. And they were trying to make it more interesting. But again, they weren't using all of the tools of design that they had available to them to support the context. Okay, so here's an example of something I think is really good art. Like there's no words on this page, but I'm pretty sure you can guess what the lesson is going to be about. What do you think they're going to end up doing when they put the text into these spaces? And this is an example where the illustration really supports the language. You see a guy thinking of tape. Yep, it's going to be a dialogue. And you can see he's got a speech bubble with describing, maybe you use it for taping up a box, or that it's like not string and not ribbon. Yeah, the process of doing what? And we see a British flag and an American flag. He's holding it over his eyes so that you can see it's transparent. And he's talking to I think a sales clerk, probably. So he may be in a stationery store. Could be mailing a package, but why would he have a thought bubble of tape? Stationery. So he might be trying to buy something and he doesn't know how to say it. So he might be trying to elicit the word. For, I'm looking for something that you use to seal a package, and it's clear, and it's sticky. It's not string, and it's not ribbon, but it's, yeah, looking for the exact vocabulary. So I think here, even without the language, the art really supports the meaning of what they're going to put in later. And just because you think something is brilliant doesn't mean it's going to be obvious to anyone else. So in the 3rd edition of Let's Go, we had this brilliant feature of a section called Let's Build, where we would teach students how to use language they already knew to create new language. So they're going to discover the generative power of English by producing new language by recycling familiar language. So this door is little and that door is big. So we already had, you know, this is a door, and the door is big. Okay, so again, I still love this idea, but teachers never really got the point that it was all recycled language. And so we got a lot of complaints back about, why is there another grammar lesson in the book? Right? So why am I having to teach another new sentence and another new question? It's too much. So they didn't see it as recycled language. It wasn't clear. And so it's gone. Because if, you know, just because we think it's wonderful, if other people don't think it's wonderful, then it's not useful for them, right? So that's why you get feedback. So who's going to use your material? Cyclical learning is important, and Let's Go has probably more recycling built in because we've worked on the same book for 30 years. It's a really tight syllabus. So when we introduce a new word in book 1, we know how it's going to be recycled in books 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. When we introduce something in book 6, we know what students have already learned in those previous, 5 or 6 books. But it's a matter of that extra lesson of the brand new language coming from recycled language. Again, the teachers using the books didn't see that point. They thought it was a new lesson, a new language lesson. So they weren't using it as an easy lesson to show students how much they can do with language. They saw it as something new they had to teach. So we replaced it with Let's Read, because it just wasn't doing what we expected it to do. So again, you're going to look at who is going to be using your materials, and that's a lot of what constrains how you write it, right? So you want, and I think what I've been showing you is that, you want to make sure that you're writing things in a way that teachers can use them as a resource, but they're not prescriptive. So that if teachers don't know what it is they're doing, they can use them as a script. But if they do know what they're doing, then they can just be a resource for jumping off and creating the course or creating the lesson that you want for your students. Content. Are you going to teach American or British English? Japan is one of the only countries that has both Englishes in the textbook catalogs. In most countries that I'm in, if you look at the coursebook catalog, everything is either American English or British English. Japan is one of those countries that sees them both as interchangeable. Are you going to be using high frequency language? Or are you teaching idioms? Are you teaching academic phrases? Are you creating things for specific purposes? And Jason, Canadian English is just like American English, but more polite. That's what I've been told. So, but one of the interesting things too is that I see, teachers, one of the first courses I was asked to teach when I came to Japan was British English pronunciation, which was kind of funny in hindsight, not so much fun at the time. But you really do get the idea that, that the Englishes are not seen as unique as we native speakers of them seem to think that they are. So, I missed my last line there. Are you trying to work on assessment? Right, so what is the purpose of what you're working on? Okay. So here, this is from an old version of Let's Go. It's not around anymore. But again, of the things we've been talking about, the instruction line, super clear. Make sentences. The things that you will use to make sentences are in the illustration. You've got she and you have they. There's support, there is space to learn, right? The students have a lot, they can make a lot of sentences with those pictures. And there's a space to teach, because you can also make sentences for he. You can also make sentences for, we. You can personalize it, have students take things out of their own book bags and talk about what I have, what you have. So you can either use the activity as it's written and there's enough support for students to do the activity, or you can use it as a jumping off point to personalize the content for your own class. And here's an example where what you think is important may not be the thing that matters, okay, as the writer. So from Let's Go first edition, we've been trying to teach descriptive adjectives to describe people. So we had tall and short, young and old, pretty and ugly, and thin and fat. So for the first 4 editions, first we tried cat families. Then we tried fairy tale characters. And we still had the same complaint from teachers. Can you imagine what it was? When students learn this language, what's the first thing they do? Yeah, pretty wasn't really the issue, but ugly and fat. And the first thing they do is describe their English teacher. Then they describe each other. And teachers didn't like it. And so finally, we thought they were really important language. I mean, ugly and fat are things that, we were thinking, oh, kids like to use, like they like to use those words to describe things. And yeah, they do. Just teachers don't like them used toward them. And they didn't like them used toward other students in the class. And so finally and like I said, we tried with the cats thinking, not judgmental, cat family. Didn't matter. We tried fairy tales because, there's always, because I think when we first tried it with the cat family, the ugly was like an ugly face or something that the brother was making. But yeah, it just didn't work. And so finally in the 5th edition, we yielded to pressure and we took fat and ugly out. So now we have handsome. Pretty and handsome, because that was the other complaint, is that we didn't have any way of talking about good-looking guys, just pretty women. So now students could describe their teachers as pretty or handsome. And again, you might not, or old. Well, we do have, actually old is there. It's just, no, we might have got rid of it. I'm not sure. Yeah, but it's there somewhere. It's not, maybe not in that lesson anymore, but we still have old. So here's some of the trends that have been coming up now. And the biggest one, and in the largest letters at the top, is digital, especially now that everybody is online. So we have also, you see a trend toward authentic language, using inclusive and diverse topics, organizing the language in, so inquiry-based syllabus, or content integration, teaching content with the language, or multiple intelligences, and those are in quotes because not everybody agrees on whether or not they exist or what they are. Task or problem-based, or focusing on assessment with preparing students for tests, or teaching character and values. Okay, so those are all content trends. Not all of them are equally trendy in all countries. Some are very popular in parts of the world and not as popular in other parts of the world. But digital is pretty much everywhere right now. So how do you decide what you're going to teach? What content are you going to include? And what do you want to teach? So this is where you get to decide, and usually you have the big overview. You've got your syllabus for the entire book or for the entire year, and you sort of plan it out making sure that you're covering all of the topics that you want to include and covering all of the functions that you want to include. And it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, trying to fit things in. And we physically would have things on index cards, moving them around, mixing and matching functions and vocabulary and grammar, and to see which ones work together better than others, because you don't want to leave something out. Like when we first published Let's Go, the first edition was supposed to be a 4-level series. And then it was way more popular than was expected. And so we decided to add 2 higher levels. But basically we covered all of the main grammar points in the first 4. So because we thought that was the end of it. And so that we had the upper levels in some ways were easier than book 4 because we had adverbs that had never been taught. And so suddenly we had a lesson on adverbs, and quickly and carefully just aren't that difficult for language. So, you know, you want to sort of look at the whole picture and make sure that you're building from easy to difficult, for example. So here's one. This is a good chance for you to decide what you would teach. This is a course book that I found online, and it self-advertises as the world's most efficacious ESL series. It's given freely to all students and teachers of English. So this is probably too much vocabulary for one lesson. But if you were going to teach it for your students, let's say you could only pick between, you know, for your students, which would be the most important vocabulary? What would you probably choose from here to teach? And you're all teaching very different levels. So between 4 and 8 words, which would you probably focus on for your students? And I'll show you a couple of examples after you tell me what you would do. Okay, face, and then things like arms and legs. And if anybody in the room is connected with Phil Brown, could you send him the password for the session? Things that get hurt or sick more often, yeah. Grouping things. The ones that appear in kids' songs, if you're working with kids, yeah. Face, arms, legs, get sick and hurt, right. So if you are looking at the brain, yeah. Okay, so if you're doing kids, yeah, heads, shoulders, knees, and toes probably, right? Yeah, the face part you're not supposed to touch in a pandemic. See, with new lessons. But if you're teaching for, here's university again, you might teach, you know, illnesses with your students, right? So this is one for teaching advice, giving advice with using sort of recycling the body parts. Okay, so it's a different purpose, and you're going to have different vocabulary, right? So there isn't one list of body parts that is essential for teaching. It's based on who you're teaching it to and what you're teaching it for. So just remember that maximum difficulty is not the same as optimal difficulty. So you want to make sure that you're hitting the right target area of your students, right? Okay, our last section, parameters. These are the boundaries that you have to work within, and some of them have been mentioned already. But one, if you're working in print or digital, different things you can do. If you're working from a word list, some countries have a list of words you need to include in the material, like a national word list. The age of your learners, right? You're going to teach fewer words for younger students. You're going to teach more vocabulary for older students because they have more passive language. You're going to perhaps focus on different body parts. Their ability, are they beginners? Do they have a lot of passive language? Are they advanced? And what country you're in. Because somebody mentioned earlier, there are cultural considerations. So here, for example, this is something that we had in Let's Go in the early editions because it was a requirement for Taiwan. Taiwan had something they called KK phonics, and it looked a lot like word family phonics from the US, analogy phonics. And so it worked out pretty well that we could have word families and these tongue twisters. But that was originally trying to meet a requirement for a country that we wanted to be able to sell books in. And have you heard of Kamina? This is the big restriction now. And Kamina stands for Central America, Middle East, and North Africa. Central Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. These are the new markets. These, we probably sell, well, we don't sell more books in the Middle East than we do in Japan, or in Asia, but it's a big market for us now, and it's a big market for all publishers. The same with North Africa. And they have specific requirements. So for example, this was in an early edition of Let's Go. So we have Amy and Wendy are playing tag and Lucky's chasing them. If you happen to be familiar with the restrictions in North Africa and the Middle East, what's the problem here? There's a couple of them. They are not covered. Yes, that's one of the problems. What else? It's similarly a problem in Mexico. The dog has to be on a leash. Okay, so yeah, so the kids are covered more, and the dogs are and dogs are filthy. And it's not just Muslim countries. A lot of Latin American countries have the same impression, and a lot of South Asian countries, not just Muslim, have the same image of dogs. Okay, here's another one. Okay, so in the early edition of Let's Go, the kids are not very well covered. And then now they're all sun safe with wearing rash guards and water wings. And I don't mind that actually, because I think that's actually a good message to be sending in these days of climate change and UV breakdown in the ozone. So it's good to teach children that they should be wearing rash guards out in the sun. And here, an early food lesson. And it's pretty easy to see which one had to go here. Ham, yeah, everybody knows that one now. So, but you know, again, I know a lot of authors that really got upset about that when they had to adapt their books for the Kamina countries, but there are so many foods to choose from that the point of the lesson is teaching a lot of and a few, and it's not which food is used to teach the language is not the main point, right? So it's easy enough to replace it with a language with a vocabulary item that doesn't bother anybody. So I don't see it as a big issue, but some people really get upset having restrictions put on the materials. And in that case, you're better off writing for your own region, or you're better off writing for your own school or your own classes. This is, if you're interested in learning about, you know, the parsnips, which are things that you're not allowed to include in a lot of books: politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms, and pork. This doesn't affect children's books very much, except for probably pork. But if you're teaching adults and you're interested in these, that link at the bottom in Smashwords, oh, there's tons left. Don't tell me that. There's always ways to work around. And anyway, this book is free to download if you like. There's some lessons that actually focus on those parsnip topics, some from Smashwords. If you're thinking about publishing, I'm almost finished up here, but if you're thinking about publishing, I can't leave the talk without speaking about piracy, because it has become a huge issue. It doesn't take much to search to find groups on Facebook that are giving away books. And on the one hand, you know, I'm not going to get into an argument over, you know, the big evil of commercial publishers making tons of money and authors living high and mighty on all of their many royalties, versus the poor teachers who can't afford to buy the books and therefore are entitled to have them free. But I do know authors who have left writing because they can no longer make a living doing it. I do know publishers who have gone out of business because they can no longer make a profit publishing materials. And what happens when that happens is that we all start losing out, because there's always going to be somebody who will work cheaper, who will just be happy to get their name on something and get it published. There will be somebody who is happy to give it away, but you start missing out on the quality when you can't afford to pay for a songwriter or musicians or studio time or artists or editors or production facilities. So there's, you know, I can see both sides of it, but I hesitate to encourage people to get into commercial publishing as a main living these days, simply because it's getting harder and harder to make a fair profit out of your work. So now regional publishing has much less piracy, and local, if you're writing for your school, you know, you're not going to get paid though, but there's very little piracy. Although I have seen people, you know, take others' works and put them online and say that they created them. So that is a form of piracy, although nobody's making money off of it. Although sometimes the person putting them up, pretending they wrote them, are charging for them. So that does happen, I guess. So in summary, you want to make sure that your materials are simple, easy to figure out. They're transparent. Anybody can pick them up and know what to do on the page. They're engaging, meaning that people will spend time on the page doing them. They're structured so that there's enough space to learn, and they're flexible so that there's enough space to teach. And if you're thinking about getting into materials writing, which, you know, it's still a wonderful thing to do, even if it's a little more challenging money-wise than it used to be. To give yourself a chance at success, you want to make sure you keep learning. So I don't write the same way I did 30 years ago, which I think is a good thing, because I know more now. There's been a lot more research on how young learners learn. So I've changed my approach because research has shown us more things. Work on a team if you can, so that you get feedback on, you want somebody to tell you that your writing isn't clear. And then get feedback from people outside your team who don't necessarily know what your work is supposed to do there. And then really listen to that feedback. A lot of times when we ask for feedback, we just want people to tell us that something is really good. And people will, especially on social media, but that's not very helpful feedback. You need to get over yourself. And that may not be obvious, but a lot of times we have a lot of ego involved in the material on the page. You know, I think our Let's Build is a good example of that. That we thought that was absolutely brilliant. It was a great feature. And yet we had to get over ourselves and give it up because it wasn't clear to other people. Write a teacher's book. That's a good way to start in writing too, if you want to. But if you write a teacher's book, it helps keep you honest about what is going on the page. A lot of problems aren't apparent until you try writing how to teach it. Keep on writing and be willing to change. So be willing to grow. Oh, thank you for adding the link for parsnips. And I think that is the end of everything I was going to say. So before I end up closing my slides or turning it over to the break, do you have any questions? Voice or chat is fine. I apologize if that was over an hour. I'm not exactly sure when I started, but sorry that if it took longer.
No, I think you're pretty close, so that's no problem.
Okay, but are there any questions from anybody, or should I just close my slides? Which I'll do
Anyone
anyway.
have any questions? Go ahead and turn your mics on if you have questions.
If not, that's fine too. I'll be happy to let you go to get a break.
Feel free to unmute yourselves, everyone, if you have any questions. No worries.
Yeah, you guys are the most polite group I've ever worked with. Okay. Well, I'm going to assume maybe there are no questions then.
And if so, people can share them and we can discuss them during the break. Okay, everybody, please join me in thanking Barb for an amazing presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barb.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, that was very interesting, very informative, and gave us a lot of things to think about.